So I'm Jeremy Pettus, and I am here to give my lecture today on how to get on the honor roll, top 10 tips for type 1. So obviously I'm an endocrinologist, I work at UCSD, I have type 1 diabetes myself, and just wanted to put some tips together, 10 of them in fact, about ways to get, your type 1 diabetes, not just like getting your blood sugars better, but just how to live your life better with type 1 diabetes, realizing that this disease is hard, and how do we get through the day-to-day. So I'm just going to jump into it. So tip number 1, here we go. I'm going to make this big. Watch what I can do here. We all get high and we all get low, and I'm going to come back. So I'm going to be doing that multiple times throughout this talk because I got fun little buttons here. So what do I mean by this? Well, I mean just that. My blood sugars get high, my blood sugars get low. This happens multiple times, sometimes during a day, during a week for sure. I think there's this expectation that, we're somehow perfect with type 1 diabetes, that our blood sugar should always just be a flat line. And I tell people the only time your blood sugar is flat is when you're dead. And that's the truth. And obviously our goal is not to be dead. We want to be alive. Even people without diabetes, when they eat, a meal or drink a soda or whatever, their blood sugars will go up 140, 150, and, it'll come back into range without any insulin or really working at all, those lucky SOBs. But with type 1 diabetes, it's tough. So just, kind of for real talk, I took a snapshot of my blood sugars over the last 24 hours because they were not perfect. So here they are. And you can see, I'm going to go, big here, slide only, that this is, again, my last 24 hours. And, yeah, I went high. My blood sugars went up to like almost 300 here. And, then I kind of plummeted. I came down and had a low blood sugar. And so I'm showing this because, am I happy about these blood sugars? Absolutely not. But I'm an endocrinologist. I have access to the latest and greatest. I know everything there is to know about type 1 diabetes pretty much. And I still have these highs and lows. So if you are suffering or dealing with this kind of erratic nature of type 1 diabetes, you are certainly not alone. Why did my blood sugar go up to 300 this day? Well, I just changed my pump that morning, and sometimes for whatever reason, it seems like it takes time for it to almost like kick in, the absorption in that particular area to start absorbing. And then it seems like all of a sudden everything hit and my blood sugar plummeted. So this is something that is not rare. Like I said, am I happy about this? No. But do I spend time wallowing about it? No. I try to get my overall goals, my overall blood sugars under control, but realizing there's going to be some imperfections. Excuse me. Just pounded a Diet Coke before I did this. Probably a bad idea. All right, so again, a specific example. This is my blood sugar when I was actually making this talk. And you can see that this isn't, bad. This upper limit here is like actually 160 for me is what I have my high alarm set at, and 80. And I'm going along. I bolused for breakfast. I ate, I don't even remember what I ate. Something just kind of typical, smallish breakfast. But my blood sugar went above my high alarm. It went up to, 160, 170 or so. And I had an arrow up, and I got mad. I did what we call rage bolus. This is when you just take out your insulin pen or your pump, or you do a big slug of insulin because you're tired of being high. And then guess what? Blood sugar goes low. My alarm goes off. I have to stop what I'm doing, go low, stuff my face. My blood sugar blasts off, to go high, and then kind of repeat. And this, in a nutshell, is type 1 diabetes. You try your best to bolus for a meal, but it usually isn't right. You go high, you do a rage bolus, and you kind of blood sugars come down. You react, you eat everything in sight, and you go high, and you repeat. So the name of the game is trying to get off this type 1 diabetes roller coaster, doing as best of a job as we can to getting our bolus right up front so we don't go high in the first place, so we don't have to correct and go low. But this can be an easy pattern for you to kind of develop. And I'm showing it in this case just to realize again, starting from a point of, I'm not going to do this top 10 pretending that type 1 diabetes is easy. A lot of the times it's the exact opposite of easy. I've taken off my pump and thrown it against a wall. I've taken my cell phone and just wanted to like scream because my blood sugars are high or low. So hopefully getting some credibility that I'm not trying to just preach about how easy this disease is, because it isn't. So tip 1 is, like I just said, it can be tough. But tip number 2 is to know your goals. So tip number 1 was we all get high, we all get low. But tip number 2 is know your goals. And I'm going to say it's important to know your goals because if you hit them, you need to eventually celebrate. So I'm showing this chart because we're moving a little bit away from A1C, not completely away. Like A1C is always going to be important. We want to get your A1C below 7 if we can. But we're realizing now that something called time in range is potentially even more important. Why? Because you can have an A1C of 5.2, but if your blood sugars are low all the time, that's not a safe place to be. Meaning that an A1C can kind of hide things. It's just an average blood sugar, but in time and range gives you a lot more information. So these are the buckets. This all comes from a continuous glucose monitor. So, I hope it goes without saying that I want everybody with type 1 diabetes, as long as they can, to get on a continuous glucose monitor. And our goal now is to try to keep our blood sugars between 70 and 180. Notice that's not 80 and 110, not aiming for quote-unquote perfection, but this is realizing that after meals, people's blood sugars do spike up. And if you can keep it under 180 all the time, you're doing fantastic. So we want our time between 70 and 180 to be as high as possible. And then we want these times low down here. Well, let me mark. Sorry. To be basically as low as possible. So our goals, to be specific, is we want our time and range to be above 70%. That means that more than 70% of the day, or the week, or whatever it is, you're within this range of 70 to 180. So basically, the higher this number can be, the better. And then on the low side, below 70, we want that less than 4%, and below 54, more of a severe low, we want that less than 1%. So the way I think about this is, again, we want the time and range to be as high as possible and the time low to be as low as possible. And you guys can all get this information if you're using CGM from the software, whether it's a Dexcom, Medtronic, a Libre, and you can track what your time and range is. So I actually get a text from my Dexcom every week, every Sunday. I don't remember setting it up, but I get it. And it says, Jeremy, your time and range this week is X, and that's a 3% increase or decrease from last week. So it's a way of just kind of keeping on track. And when you go see your provider, you can say, hey, my time and range is 63%. I want to give it above 70%. Knowing these goals is important. A1C has been burnt into our head, but now we're starting to have conversations around time and range, and it's something much more easy to track because you can do it rather than having to go to the lab, every 3-6 months to get your A1C done. So knowing these goals is really important. There's actually goals for time hyperglycemic also. We want that to be basically as low as possible. But again, the more time you have in range, the less time you're going to have hyperglycemic. So I just try to get that time in range above 70% with as little lows as possible. What's another way of saying that? We want your blood sugars to be as well controlled as possible without suffering on the hypo side. So again, people that come in, they want their A1C to be 5, to be perfect. They usually are kind of getting the too much hypoglycemia. So it is about that balance, that tightrope. Bring your blood sugars down, but not too low. All right. So tip number 1, we all go high and low. Tip number 2 is know your goals. But then if you hit those goals, you got to celebrate them. So what are some of these wins to celebrate? And I guess I should set this up because, with type 1 diabetes, it's hard to get a win, right? I mean, what do we want with type 1 diabetes? We want absolutely nothing to happen. And think about that for a second. Our goal is to have nothing happen. We want to just get through a day without our blood sugars being high or low. We want to get through the next years in our life without any complications. We don't want retinopathy. We don't want our feet to hurt. We don't want our kidneys to fail. But you can't work forever to achieve nothing because you can never achieve nothing. There's no point where you come to and say, I did it. So you have to create something that is worth celebrating, without, saying 50 years down the road, then I'll celebrate if I die on my deathbed, without complications. So what are some things to celebrate? Well, I'm going to blow this up. Slide only. Nailing a bolus. Well, what does that mean? Well, you took a bolus. Maybe you're eating some burrito or something that you've never come across before. You do your best to count carbs or whatever. And by the way, I don't really officially count carbs. I never really learned it. I learned the exchange system. So, we all kind of count carbs in our head, but kind of guesstimate. But maybe you're eating something, you take your bolus and you don't go high and you don't go low. That's worth celebrating. Nailing a bolus is difficult. Give yourself a little pat in the back, or maybe just one of like these, and then get on with your business. All right. Number 2, waking up with a good number. This is getting easier and easier now with these kind of hybrid closed loop systems, these artificial pancreas systems. But man, waking up with a blood sugar of 100, 110, you just know your day is going to be better. So that's worth celebrating. Pulling off exercise. Exercise is tough. It's probably the thing I struggle with the most in terms of blood sugars, not going low during, not rebounding high afterwards. So if you exercise, you go for a run, bike ride, and you're not low or high the entire time, that really is difficult to do, and it's definitely worth celebrating. All right, your A1C is amazing. Notice I didn't say, good or less than 7. It just means it's amazing. Maybe you went from 11 to 10. Maybe you went from 10 to 9. Each percent decrease you get in your A1C, each 1 point decrease, decreases your risk of microvascular complications by about 30%. So, I have people that come in, their A1C is 9, 10, and they're kind of bummed out that they're not to 7 yet. But every step along the way is a benefit. And if you are making improvements, then you should celebrate that. Yeah, you got work to do. Maybe you're not where you want to be. But if you're going in the right direction, celebrate that. Your eye exam went well. God, I hate getting my eyes dilated. Why? Again, because usually it's only, the only thing that you can hear is bad news. And if you hear everything's okay or it's stable, that's worth celebrating. Or maybe you do have complications. You have retinopathy or macular edema, but that's stable. The treatment plan you're on is working. Your eyesight is doing well. Celebrating those. And like I said, I hate getting my eyes dilated because, again, you don't want bad news. And also because I can't do anything for the rest of the day because my eye's all wonky. Your diaversary. So what does that mean? People usually say that's the date that they were diagnosed, and they celebrate that every year in different ways. And most people do it in kind of a rebellious way. I'm going to eat cake, whatever I want, because it's another year that I'm living happy and healthy with type 1 diabetes. And I don't know the exact date that I was diagnosed. I know it was in July, so I just call it July 15th. And every July 15th, I just go buck wild and do whatever the heck I want. Number 7, a no-hitter. So what is that? So that means that you're keeping your blood sugars in range between 70 and 180 for a entire 24-hour period. You're not hitting the high or low alarm, so you're a no-hitter. And that's tough to do. 100% time in range for a day. If you get that, definitely worth celebrating. Take a screenshot, send it to people, even if it's people that you just met at Target yesterday. Number 8. Correcting a super high without going low. Okay, this is a tough one. I'm reading this list that I made the other day, and I'm happy with my list. So how often you've been, 300, and you do like what I said, the rage bolus, and then you just come crashing down, and, your blood sugar's 50, and you have to eat. But what about those times that your blood sugar's high, and you just kind of coast down into a nice, smooth, 100 or whatever? You don't overdo it. That is worth celebrating. Getting a zillion days out of your CGM sensor. People are kind of MacGyvering it with duct tape or whatever it is, reusing it multiple ways. That's something to be happy about. Learning to juggle, doesn't have to be diabetes related, but something maybe just to celebrate. So, I'm being funny, but these are actually important because there needs to be positive feedback in type 1 diabetes. I love actually on my Dexcom CGM report, it'll tell you what your best day is. So not just like, you're high, you're low, like whatever. This was my best day. And I actually think you can learn a lot from that. I love when patients come in to see me and their best day was yesterday and something fresh in their memory. And I'll say, look, maybe like the 3-month period wasn't exactly where we wanted, but yesterday you did awesome. What did you do that day? And sometimes it's nothing drastic. It was like, oh, well, maybe I eat less carbs or, I was walking more or whatever it was. That positive feedback can actually be very, very helpful. And even if it doesn't help improve your overall control, it can be so important for your mental kind of sanity to realize, look at all this crap that we're dealing with. And if I'm doing some of these things well, that's worth congratulating myself and taking a moment, however you want. Share it with somebody, share it just with yourself, share it with your bartender, whatever. So let me get rid of this. I asked a friend and colleague, Dr. Leslie Island. She works in Omaha, Nebraska. She has type 1 diabetes, endocrinologist. I said, what would you tell people about, tips and tricks for type 1 diabetes? And she said, exactly this. I would say celebrate victories, specifically even the small ones. Example, I perfectly bolused for some more a few weeks ago and felt like a boss. And I just love that. And that's what prompted me to come up with this category about these celebrations. And I think she kind of nailed the spirit of it there. All right, so, kind of along these lines, this is a typical patient, somebody that kind of exemplifies this point I'm trying to make, and I see this type of patient a lot. So this guy, Brian, he's a 68-year-old male, he's on a pump, and he came to me asking me just that he wanted to do better. I hadn't seen his A1C, his CGM download, anything like that. I kind of walked into the room, he's hanging his head low. Gosh, doc, I just need to do better, like I'm going to, start beating him up. Which a lot of times people can feel like their endocrinologist is beating them up, which isn't really right. We should be on the same team. Anyways, I get his CGM download, and this is it. So I'll blow this up again, and I'm going to mark it. So first of all, you can see his average blood sugar is 148. which would predict an A1C of 6.9, so he's really doing well there. His time in range is 78%. I told you, like, our goal is to get above 70, so he's doing that really well. And then down here is his time low. He's having very few lows, 1% or less than 1% severe lows. And then if you look over like kind of the 24-hour period from midnight to midnight, on average, his blood sugars are in range. So, you know, all these people that I see, and specifically this guy, is like, you know, point blank asking him, what do you mean do better? And he's like, well, you know, I just feel like I'm still spiking after certain meals or whatever. And, you know, trying to tell these people, it's tough to break that mental paradigm of, look, again, we're all going to have highs and lows. You're kicking butt. You're doing everything you need to do. You're meeting all these metrics. And what do you mean you want like a perfect blood sugar? Because let's keep in mind that the goal of diabetes is not to have perfect blood sugars. It's to live a long and healthy life. And if you are staying in range, 70% or more, your A1C is in a good number, you're going to die of something else. You're going to get hit by a bus if we're so lucky. In other words, it's saying is that your diabetes is you're well controlled. So this idea of doing better, for what? You know, you are meeting all your metrics. You are going to likely live a complication-free life. I think people can assume that they're going to get complications, and that really just isn't the case anymore. So if you're doing well, please celebrate that. And so the vast majority of this visit was just trying to work on him with kind of his mental health, if you will, around what meeting goals are and what he means by kind of doing better. And I think, you know, eventually, it's not like all of a sudden he walked out the door and he was just, you know, singing and dancing, but he kind of, you know, started down this road of, gosh, like, you know, maybe I should be a little bit easier on myself. And I know there's a lot of you listening that are in this boat. There's a lot of people that are not meeting their goals. And I'm not saying that, you know, that's not, you got work to do, whatever. But there's a lot of people that are doing well, and they just need to realize that. And that's why I have this thing, I put this up on one of my last talks, of just people saying to themselves, I am healthy. That I think people, again, feel I have type 1 diabetes, I'm damaged. I remember when I was diagnosed, it was, well, Jeremy, you lost 10, 15 years off your life, congratulations, which is kind of a screwed up thing to tell a 15-year-old, but I know a lot of you got that same information, whether it was directly told to you or, you know, you kind of heard it anecdotally or you read it online. But the truth is, if you have type 1 diabetes, you are healthy. And if you are controlling your blood sugars, you are in a healthy, safe place. You can live a very long and healthy life. So that's an important message. All right, so let's lighten it up a little bit. But an important tip, tip number 4, become a hoarder. So what does that mean? Well, type 1 diabetes is a disease of stuff, right? We need all of our stuff, insulin, CGM, test strips, glucagon, whatever. And the times that diabetes has really pissed me off, where I've had like real pity parties, is when I'm doing something and I have to stop because I don't have the stuff I need to fix it. So I'm traveling and I break into a vial of insulin and I have to just like stop doing whatever I'm doing. Or just if I'm doing work and my blood sugar goes, you know, I go low and I don't have a soda anywhere near me and I have to go on this, you know, epic journey to find blood sugar or glucose or something. So having stuff around can be so important, and taking time to really make sure you have everything you need in every place that you might need it. So I just have examples. So I hoard insulin, and I'm fortunate enough that I can get samples and things like that. So this is my fridge at work where I have a bunch of insulin. I have insulin in my fridge at home. Insulin, if you keep it in the refrigerator, doesn't really go bad. And you should always, you know, make sure you're putting your stuff on automatic refills, your pharmacy, so you're constantly getting your supplies of insulin, because you really don't want to be out of it. And whenever you go anywhere, make sure that you take more than you'll need. Again, I can't tell you how many times I've traveled. It seems like it's always when you're traveling that things go wrong. Dropped a vial of insulin and just seen the insulin leak out on the floor, and you're just like, no. Taking multiple vials of insulin, everything you need with you all the time. I got my diet root beer up there in the corner too. Insulin pump supplies, same things, and obviously getting them. But then the key here is putting them everywhere. Because yeah, you might normally change your pump at home, but what happens if you get in an occlusion when you're at work? The last thing you want to do is have to drive all the way back home and deal with that. So making sure you have pump supplies, insulin at multiple different places, in your car if you can, at work, at home, at grandma's house, wherever. Glucose tabs. So guess what? I hate glucose tabs. And because I hate glucose tabs, they're my preferred, if you will, low food. What do I mean by that? Well, if I had something I actually liked, like gummy bears or Skittles, I would just eat them because I want to eat some Skittles or gummy bears. But I've never just been like jonesing for a glucose tab. So I buy a ton of these and I keep them. This is like my work bag. I have them in my car. I have them by my bed. I have them in the kitchen. I have them everywhere because they're relatively cheap. If you just go on Amazon and take the time and just kind of stash these everywhere, that can really help you. And I mentioned by my bed, which is probably the most important one, because I've realized that if I get out of bed, you're never going to stop yourself from just demolishing the whole fridge. So I know if I just keep my glucose tabs by my bed, I eat 4 of them, and sometimes I'll do apple juice or something, but the point is having it by my bed so I don't have to get out of bed is important. So stashing something for low blood sugar everywhere. The greatest fear is being somewhere and you're trapped and you don't have something to treat low blood sugar is awful. And then CGM stuff. Stockpiling this as much as you can. Trying to extend sensor life if you can. If a sensor goes wrong, make sure you call to get a new one because not making it to the next refill is a real pain in the butt. So get everything, hoard it if you can, put it everywhere is a really important step. Tip 5, eat low carb-ish. So notice I didn't just say 0 carb or keto. And why? Well, low carb works. If you eat less carbs, your blood sugars are generally better. I have ish here because it can be hard to maintain. If you can eat 0 carbs or very low carb, more power to you. I just personally don't have the willpower or whatever you want to call it because carbs are delicious that I do eat carbs. Gasp. But low carb doesn't mean that it has to be low deliciousness, right? There's generally things that you can find that you like that are still low carb. So an example, I love In-N-Out. It's a hamburger place we have here in California, and you guys on the East Coast are missing out. But you can get it protein style, which means instead of the bun, it's lettuce wrapped. And you can do that everywhere. But I just have In-N-Out as an example because I like it. Now, this still will raise your blood sugar, but it's going to, because the protein and fat still will raise your blood sugar. But you're not going to get that high spike like you do when you eat carbs. And part of the issue with carbs raising our blood sugar is that our insulins just act too slow. It takes 20, 30 minutes for your insulin to kick in, and it takes carbs only 5 minutes or so. So we're always kind of losing that battle because our insulin's too slow. That's what I always talk about pre-bolusing 20, 30 minutes before if you're going to eat carbs. So, eggs, bacon, protein, there's things that you can find that are low carb. There's chicken and basically any vegetables. Meat is your friend. Chicken, pork, steak, fish, vegetables, all good. Cauliflower rice. I've come to enjoy cauliflower rice because why? Well, why does people eat rice? Why do I eat rice? It's mostly a way of delivering whatever sauce it is to my mouth, usually soy sauce or whatever. And so cauliflower rice does a great job of soaking up the sauce, and it's very, very low carb. So I do like it, actually. And then I have alcohol here because just to make the point that there's in anything that you're eating or drinking, there's low carb options. So beer, pina coladas, those things are very high carb, but hard alcohol, zero carbs. Wine is very low carb. So the point being, not that everyone should go out and just start taking shots of whiskey, but that in every avenue of your life, breakfast, lunch, dinner, alcohol, parties, whatever, there's low carb options that you can choose and not really have to suffer in terms of not eating things that you particularly enjoy. And along the alcohol lines, this is one of my favorite videos that Steve and I did. This is basically us drinking in real time. I drank beer and he drank hard alcohol, and we did over a 15-minute period. You can just Google alcohol and diabetes, do they mix, TCOYD, watch the video. There's a lot to learn with alcohol in terms of how it affects your blood sugars, obviously how it affects your mentation, how you can stay in control, how you can drink safely is basically the whole theme of this talk. Knowing what you're drinking is so important in terms of carbs, knowing how it's going to affect you mentally, and obviously with type 1 diabetes, you always kind of have to be on top of things. So how to deal with that when you're drinking. So this is a good video because it's fun. Obviously you can see there's some merriment to be had here, but it's a really important topic that nobody really asks their provider about, and providers are generally uncomfortable talking about, so I'm glad we kind of took it on. All right, now, I don't want you to think that, like I said, that I'm mandating everybody eat low carb because, I don't all the time. So I say here, sometimes you have to say F it. Now look, I'm doing my best. My blood sugars are doing well. I'm taking all my insulin. I'm really watching my carbs, but every once in a while, you got to just say F it. What does that mean? That you got to eat things that you really want that, just like anybody else would. We have to eat healthy and be conscious of that, but sometimes you want to eat something that maybe you shouldn't with diabetes, but that's okay. So there's this things called acai bowls here in San Diego, and they're becoming popular everywhere. It's basically a type 1 diabetes nightmare. It's this fruit, I don't even know what it is, acai, that's like this like goo. It's like very high carb. And they usually put granola on it, fruit, sometimes honey, peanut butter, all these things. I love them. You know, do I eat them all the time? No, because I know I'm never going to get my insulin dose right. I'm always going to be high. But every once in a while, I have them. And what about pizza, beer? These are things I love, you know, and I'll have them, obviously, from time to time. So the other day, I had some pizza and some beer. My blood sugar went up to 250. And I just, you know, said, F it. And I ate a donut. And, you know, that's just the point, that sometimes your things aren't going to go just according to plan. And realizing that, and not that you do this all the time, but you just say, you give yourself a pass, basically. My blood sugar is 250. I'm going to correct my blood sugar, get it back under the range. I'm not going to beat myself up about it. And I'm going to fight the fight the next day. So that's an important thing. And to be cognizant of it, that, you know, I am allowing myself to have this high blood sugar. I realize that this isn't my goal, but I'm gonna move on from it. I made a choice to have this pizza, to have this donut, whatever. You know, this is the consequences, the natural consequences of it, but you can make these choices. It's important. So along these lines, another favorite video of mine is we did the 3 donut challenge. How to eat 3 donuts and stay in range. And again, so Steve and I ate the same 3 donuts and try to stay between 70 and 180 the whole time. And a couple important messages here is, again, we're not advising to eat 3 donuts, but if you want to, you can. And we had to work our butts off to stay in range, and we did a pretty good job. So it's an entertaining video. It goes over some techniques of how to use insulin, how to bolus for these kind of high carb meals. Again, not recommending anybody like do this, but trying to make the point that you can. And so go watch this video, basically. All right. Tip number 7. So don't forget about non-blood sugar issues. So Dr. Edelman's doing a talk. This is for, you know, our virtual back-to-school conference. He's doing a talk right after me exactly on this topic. But I just want to make sure to mention it. So what do I mean? So basically, when people come in to see me for their type 1 diabetes visit, we spend 99 to 100% of the time talking about their blood sugars, you know, and poring over their continuous glucose monitor and their pumps and talking about different options for treating their blood sugars and exercise, alcohol, these things that we're talking about, which are so important. And it's not uncommon for them to leave the visit, and I'm kind of writing my note later, and then I realize, gosh, their blood pressure was a little bit high. We didn't even talk about that. Oh, well, their cholesterol's been high for, you know, the last couple of times we've checked it. We really need to address that. Or gosh, we forgot to address the last time that they got their eyes screened or their feet or whatever. So the point being is that blood sugars can become all-consuming because it's literally a minute-to-minute thing that you're dealing with, that you can almost forget about these other things, blood pressure, cholesterol, your health screening, which are just as important, if not more important than your blood sugars, and actually much, much easier to address. So blood pressure, you know, it's a problem for every American, but particularly people with diabetes can have high blood pressure. We're at higher risk of heart disease. And blood pressure and cholesterol are more important, if you will, in terms of cardiovascular disease than blood sugars. They're more manageable, and they affect cardiovascular disease more. So what's your goal? Keep your blood pressure around 140/90 or less. If you need medications to meet those goals, for God's sakes, take them. They're usually once-a-day pill, generic, cheap. They've been around for a long time, very efficacious. So ask. You know, have your checklist. You know, people come in with their 20 things they want to talk about with their blood sugars. Hey, what is my blood pressure? Am I meeting goals? Do I need any medications for that? And same thing with cholesterol. Hugely important in terms of cardiovascular risk. Very easy to treat. There's now multiple medications that people can use. Statins are generic. They've been around forever. They've been a little vilified in terms of side effects, that they can cause muscle cramps, but in the very, you know, vast opposite of minority of people. So very safe, efficacious medications. What is your goal? We're moving a little bit away from actually targeting a cholesterol number and more towards overall risk. Meaning that if you have type 1 diabetes and you're, you know, probably over 40 or so, you should definitely be considering, if not on, one of these medications. Very efficacious, very easy to take, huge in terms of cardiovascular disease risk reduction. getting your eyes checked every year or two if you're really well controlled, making sure that you're checking your urine for protein. These are the things that your doctor should order. But this should be a checklist that I do have, and every endocrinologist should have in their kind of note template, but that you need to advocate for yourself also. So I'm just going to blow this up because I haven't done this in a while. Doc, what's my blood pressure? That might be a 2-minute talk, 30-second talk. What's my blood pressure? You're great. Stay on your meds, or not. We should talk about that. But these things are so important that you cannot forget about them. All right, coming back. All right, tip number 8. Okay, Jeremy, but what about my blood sugar? What are some tips that like really practical things that I might talk to everybody with type 1 diabetes about in terms of getting their blood sugars down? So I'm going to go back to slide only. So number 1, use a CGM, for God's sake. If you've tried one a long time ago and it didn't work, well, guess what? They're a lot better now. So get back on a CGM. Set your alarms right. What does that mean? Set your high and low alarm at some place that you're going to do something about it. Sometimes people have their high alarm set at 140 and it's just going off all the time and it just becomes a nuisance. So set your high alarm at a place that's a call to action. Every time it goes off, I need to stop what I'm doing, take insulin, do whatever. Don't just set it to annoy you, because then it becomes completely useless. Don't set it over what your endocrinologist thinks you should set it. Mine's set at 160 because I know every time I go at 160, I need to take some insulin, I need to do something. I started initially at 200 and then went to 180 and 160, and it's a call to action. And that's for you to decide where it is, but it should be, again, exactly that. When it goes off, I got to do something. Same thing on the low side. When it goes off, I can't ignore it. I got to take some carbs or do something so I don't get into trouble. If you're not on one of these new CG or hybrid closed-loop systems like the Tandem Control IQ, fantastic system. The Omnipod's supposed to be coming out with theirs any day now. Strongly consider getting on these because they work really well. Get your insulin settings in the right ballpark, basal rate, carb ratio, correction factor. Don't obsess about these. Get them in the right ballpark, and then it really becomes more about lifestyle, making sure you're bolusing before every meal, than having them exactly right. Sometimes people have 37 different rates, and it becomes more of a problem than it's worth. Typically, people can do fine with just one basal rate, one carb ratio, sensitivity factor, maybe 2 or 3. Pre-bolus for every meal or snack. Nighttime snacks aren't free. Pre-bolus meaning take your insulin 20 to 30 minutes before you eat carbs, because it takes that long for the insulin to start working. You need to do that pre-bolus. Otherwise, you're always going to be having that spike and you're always going to be reacting to blood sugars. And nighttime snacks aren't free. And what I see a lot is that people eat a small breakfast, reasonable lunch, a good-sized dinner, and then people snack from dinner till they go to bed. I do this myself too. And it doesn't count because it's 1 grape or it's 2 crackers or it's 3, whatevers. But remember, those do add up, so you got to bolus for those every time you eat. Consider adding Afrezza. We've done a lot of talks on Afrezza, so check those out on our TCOYD video vault. It's an inhaled insulin that works very quickly. So you can use it for all meals and corrections. You could use it in addition to your pump. It's a real just benefit that people need to know about. It's really a breakthrough in terms of, it's inhaled, but it just works so quickly that it can really help correct those stubborn highs, and it can help combat kind of high carb meals. All these are important kind of blood sugar tips that I go over with basically every single patient. Number 9, get a diet buddy. This is just saying that, my diet buddy is my buddy Steve. And so people say, well, you're so lucky, Steve, you guys can, help each other with your diabetes. Yeah. But when I call Steve, I'm not saying like, hey, what should I change my carb ratio to? It's more like, man, my blood sugar's high again. I went low last night. It's just somebody to just lament with, or who gets it. When you see somebody and you're at the park or whatever, and somebody else wearing a pump, you're immediately like somebody who would just understand it. So having Steve in my life has been super important, not because, again, he's an endocrinologist or runs TCOYD, but just because he has type 1 diabetes. So if you can, find somebody with type 1 diabetes. And if it's not a physical person, well, it's obviously going to be a physical person. But what I mean is it could be online, a community, somebody like just some area where you can get support. Is really important. So here's Steve and I on an airplane. This is pre-COVID. Here we are just, at a bar having a good time. I'm going to make these bigger. Here we are just on a Tuesday having some cigs and some Twinkies. Obviously, this was a funny skit we were doing for diabetes in the future. We do not smoke cigarettes, although we will have an occasional Twinkie. Here we are, New Year's a couple years later. Here we are in Hawaii. And I just like this picture of Steve. I don't know what's going on here, but he doesn't look happy, which just doesn't go well with like the suit, because it looks like he should be happy. He's like a happy little elf with a mad face. I'm just gonna look at that for a second. I think we all should. All right. Tip number 10, my final tip, rounding things out, you're going to be okay. I just spent a long time talking about all these things that we have to deal with. If you're on top of your blood sugars, you're going to live a long and healthy life. I said it before, just say it out loud. I am healthy. I am healthy. Tap it in the chat box, whatever. You're doing fine. You're going to be okay. And I have this here. It says type 1 diabetes life expectancy is now longer than people without diabetes. This isn't crap I'm pulling out of my rear end. These are studies now that follow people with type 1 diabetes, compare them to people without diabetes. As long as you keep your A1C controlled, and in this study, it was around an A1C of 7.5 or less. Again, our goal is around 7. That those people live longer than people without diabetes. So the point there is this idea that you just lost 10, 15 years, get it out of your head. If you're on top of things, you're going to do well. And why do people live longer? Well, probably because we're a little more health conscious. We're seeing our physicians more regularly. We're addressing blood pressure and cholesterol. Maybe I've seen a doctor a bunch in my life, but I'm only in my 40s now. I probably wouldn't have been seeing them, but I'm way more conscious of my blood pressure and my cholesterol, exercising more, eating right, whatever that means. So it makes sense, and it's actually nice to hear that these efforts that we're putting into our health and our life are paying off. So people are living longer than we ever thought possible. So just know that that's you too, that you're going to make it to your grandkids, wedding and all those kinds of things. These goals that we set for ourselves are obtainable living with type 1 diabetes. So let's recap. We all get high, we all get low. Let me make this big. Set your goals and then celebrate the victories. If you hit those goals, celebrate it. Become a hoarder, stash everything everywhere. Eat low carb-ish. Say F it every once in a while. God knows we got to. Health maintenance, blood pressure, cholesterol, blip, 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 blip. You can see it written there. And I mentioned the blood sugar tips that you can go back and look at. Get a diet buddy, and you're going to be okay. So the last thing I have here, it says, type 1 diabetes is the best thing that ever happened to me. I say this frequently. Sometimes I mean it more than I don't, but I really enjoy being part of the community. I do think it's made me healthy. It's given me a goal and passion for the work and things that I'm doing with TCOYD and at the university. And I just hope that this eventually becomes something you say. Maybe not every day, but realizing that type 1 diabetes, it has some benefits, and it can make you live a healthier, more conscious life, more empathetic. There is lots of potential benefits of this disease. So I hope you enjoyed that talk. Thanks for listening. If you're here for the virtual conference, we're going to move on with the virtual conference. If you're just watching this online, check out all the other videos we have at tcoyd.org in our video vault. And with that, I will sign off. So thanks so much.